Hello, welcome back to the YouTube channel of Bethel Evangelical Free Church Hanley. I'm Pastor Gervais Charm. This is another Worcestershire church. This is the church of St. Peter, Arley. It's a beautiful location. It's overlooking the River Severn, and we'll see that when we go outside. But the building itself is also very interesting. Like many churches, it has a 12th century origin, but what we see today is largely of the 13th, 14th centuries, bit of 16th century, and it was restored in the 1880s. It has a long connection with the Annesley family, whose seat at nearby Arley Castle was sadly demolished in the 1960s. It was a fantastic Victorian fantasy castle, but it fell into disrepair, and rather than fix it up, it was just knocked down. So sadly, that's gone now. But there's a lot of evidence of the Annesley family here in the building. So we'll have a look around and see the various evidences of the history here. And of course, simply because of the type of church this is, there's a lot of it is about the local big house and the local important families. So we'll have a look around and see what we can see. And so, as usual, we start at the west end. Now, there are various things you can find in a west tower. Very often there'll be the essentially ringing loft, and usually underneath be some kind of vestry or something. But here there's more seating, more chairs. It's not a huge village, but obviously back in the day you'd have the big house, you'd have the servants. It's an agricultural area, so you'd have lots and lots of farm labourers, so they did need a bit of the space. Looking into the nave, we can see that there are no windows on the lower part of the south wall, because all that space is now occupied by memorials. And up here we have a couple of funerary hatchments. Hatchments are, well, they're basically displayed at the funeral, or they were displayed at the funeral of members of the nobility. They show, of course, their arms. And then they're laid up in the church, as we see here. Commandment boards, not terribly visible in the light here, but it's a marvellous building, and you can see here the stonework is the sort of stonework that actually is supposed to, or that works very well when it is exposed. It's the local pinkish stone, which is a rather nice colour if you ask me. The font is Victorian, but imitation 13th century. We have here memorials, Annesley memorials, Henry Arthur Annesley, who was drowned, sadly, while swimming at Blackpool, and died not long after, sadly, his marriage in 1818. There's a single aisle on the north side, as I've noted before. Where there's only one aisle, it's normally on the north side. Because these would have been oil lamps, they've now been converted to electricity. And we move into the aisle now. There's not a lot of stained glass here. All the side windows are plain glass, with just a few little bits of stained glass here and there. The church was restored 1885 to 1886, and at that time the chancel was largely rebuilt, although it has been at least partially, some of it's been retained. We have here a memorial to the Reverend John Allen, who was incumbent here for 30 years, but sadly he was killed in an unfortunate accident in 1850, on August the 23rd, 1850. We're not told what the accident was. Of course, all kinds of things could happen. Here we can see that the exception to the no stained glass in the side windows is these little armorial painted glass at the top of the windows. The communion rails here in the side chapel, these are in fact the old communion rails that used to be at the east end before the restoration. They're earlier 19th century, or perhaps even late 18th century, and they'd be regarded as a bit too spindly for Victorian tastes. Again, another bit of armorial glass up there. We step into the chapel. Very often this would be what they would call the Lady Chapel, and they're Of course, it's so called because often they'll be dedicated to the Virgin Mary. And we have looking west and then looking back into the nave, and you can see up there the light on the south side just comes all through the clerestory. This is Sir Walter de Balin. He was killed in a jousting accident. Tournaments, of course, were... Well, they had a couple of functions. One of them was that they were an entertainment. The other one was they were supposed to keep knights trained in how they were supposed to fight. But, of course, they were dangerous. Because although a tournament was not a duel, it wasn't supposed to involve people dying. If you've got horses moving at high speed and people going at each other full tilt with lances... Now, the aim was to just unhorse your opponent, but if something went wrong, people died. And I'll say a little bit more about it when we go around the other side. We have here a piece of what looks like a medieval glass of a pope. Probably Gregory the Great, who of course is the man who sends Augustine of Canterbury over to England. We have here a memorial to Arthur Littleton Annesley and his wife Mary, set up by their children, and he died in 1882, she in 1886. We have the Lord is my shepherd, the prodigal son, the Good Samaritan, and then Christ receiving little children. And then we go through into the chancel. They say this was rebuilt in the 19th century, so this is basically Victorian. The old chancel was in a bit of a bad state, and also it would have been regarded as not quite fit for purpose anymore. There's a desire to have something that looked a bit more medieval rather than the buildings that had been altered and changed over the years. So we've got the Sedilia and Piscina, which are, of course, imitation. Then Captain Robert Woodward, who was killed in the Great War, gave his life May 9th, 1915. And then here we have the organ. Quite common to find the organ tucked away in a chamber, of course, like that. Nice little organ. Well, not that so little, actually, two manual. And then looking west here, very noble interior. So have another look at Sir Walter here. Now, Sir Walter is, as I say, he was killed in a tournament in 1270. When he was on his way to the 8th Crusade. He'd just been married, tournament, and of course as a knight he wanted to take part to prove his knightly valour, to hone his skills, and unfortunately he's killed. And this is one of the reasons why the medieval church was opposed to tournaments, because tournaments killed people sometimes. And particularly if you're on your way to a crusade and you're killed, well, the medieval church then says, hang on a minute, this man should have been fighting to free the Holy Land from the Saracens, and instead he's killed in a sport, basically. But there he is, Sir Walter de Balin. And back then into the nave. So you've got the Victorian pulpit, one of these ones with open work, which is all very well, of course, if you're wearing vestments, but you've got to make sure your shoes have been properly shone. Here we have more Annesley memorials. George Arthur Annesley, Viscount Valentia, and when it comes to nobility, you have what are called courtesy titles. That is to say that the eldest son of a nobleman will have a noble title of his own, but it doesn't actually make him a nobleman. Further complicating things, the Annesleys were the Earls of Mount Norris, which is in southern Ireland, and so they were Irish nobility, and an Irish nobleman, because he's not a member of the House of Lords he's never a member of the House of Lords in England, an Irish nobleman could be elected to the House of Commons. This sometimes meant that people would be elevated to the Irish nobility as a reward by a government, by a Prime Minister who wanted to nevertheless keep them in the House of Commons. And so we have here, this is the biggest and grandest of the lot, and this is Henry Littleton. And it's sort of the Littletons then marry, the heiress of the Littletons marries the Annesleys, and therefore the families are united. But there's the arms. I mean, look at that, very impressive. And there's that pulpit again. So that's the inside here, and you can see here War Memorial, the Great War Memorial around the corner, but is currently concealed by a flower arrangement. So that is the interior here. Just see there the outline of an older doorway before the present one was put in. That's the inside, and then we'll have a look at the outside. And so here we are outside at Arley. You can see behind me the West Tower, the clerestory, and the organ chamber. It's a magnificent building, and it's a lovely location. You can see the top of the tower, the windows there are very definitely 18th century. So it's clearly been altered over the years. And as we look around, we'll see evidence of that. So let's do that. So there we go. You can see there the turret, which obviously gives access to the roof, as well as giving access to the ringing chamber, which is above the area where we saw the seats. There's the porch. You can just see between the porch and the organ chamber, that is the outline of a window that's been blocked because those Annesley memorials have been put up. It's a rather nice effect you get with the various colours of stone, this patchwork effect. And very sensibly, when the Victorian chancel was, when the chancel was rebuilt by the Victorians, they've replicated this patchwork effect that you can just see on the nave there, because it's a very pleasing effect. It really makes the building look, but it makes it look exciting and interesting. It's a very common feature of churches in this area, because you've got these various different types of sandstone, and of course it's all to do with the mineral makeup of the sandstone. Some have a bit more iron in them than others. It's dated 1885, and yes, that's very 1885, isn't it, that? So around, just see here the difference in terms of weathering between the Victorian stone and the medieval stone of the aisle there. The yew tree, they're very commonly found in churchyards for various reasons. Around here, and those nice tall 15th, maybe even 16th century windows, square-headed windows. One of the nice things here is that the Victorian restoration has not been overdone, because we have here various Annesley memorial, Annesley graves here under the tree. But the Victorian restoration hasn't been overdone. It's still very much a church that's happened over time. There's a modern kitchen, toilet block here. It's something that's quite common now. It's something that needs really to be provided in the modern day and age. It's no longer acceptable, well, not to. And now looking up, those window heads at the top are typically 18th century, so suggests that the top of the tower was built then, although the lower part does look medieval. And again, it's a rather nice extension. They've used a bit of local stone, and you've got windows that are very much in keeping. And here, there's more memorials. Of course, the Annesley's estate was through there. And then, as we come around here, we see the view. So we're here overlooking the river Severn, and It's quite a spectacular sight. The village is basically a no-through road, and the church is right at the top of the village. And beyond the village, of course, there is, well, beyond the church, there's where the castle used to be. It's a big house estate. It's a lovely, lovely view from up here, particularly on an early September morning like this. And here we are back around at the tower with its stair turret, etc. There is a plaque on the sides talking about rebuilding, but I cannot read the date on it, but that's going to be related, I would think, to those windows. And you can see there the clerestory, which from its style it's either late 16th or early 17th century, so quite late, but still very, very much Gothic survival, as they called it. Then you've got that porch there, so that is Arley St. Peter's. St. Peter's is a church that's normally open. A few years ago there was an appalling outrage. Some idiots went in, decided to make a mess, among other things. Thankfully that hasn't put the church off from opening, because sometimes it does. And it's very important to emphasise that these buildings are kept open because of the devotion, desires of local people, and the idea that the church should be open as a place of quiet reflection, as well as being a centre, as this is, for the heritage of the village. Well, thank you for watching, and may God bless you and keep you until next time.